Eagles Entertainment.
With the 15th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, presented by LifeBrand. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and we've got a fun show for you today as we get closer and closer to the NFL Draft. T-minus 7 days until draft weekend is finally here. We're going to start things off with Pick 6, where Greg Cosell is going to stop by, talk through 6 players, 4 on defense, 2 on offense, all of the skill position variety. So we're going to talk through 2 corners, 2 safeties, and 2 wide receivers with Greg. Really fun conversation, not just about the prospects, but also big picture in terms of player evaluation. After that, we've got Draft Buzz, where Ben Fennell and we've got some draft over-under, some things that I kind of dreamt up a little bit. I'm going to present to Ben. We'll see what he thinks about how this draft is going to roll out in the first, we'll say round or 2 by the time we get to next week. And then also we're going to go through Pete Traeger's mock, a new mock draft over at NFL.com. Pete Traeger from Good Morning Football. He's got some interesting selections here in this mock draft. We'll break it all down with Ben in Draft Buzz. We wrap things up with 2 Eagles-only fan mock drafts in our draft mailbag. Now, I'm going to say this one last time. We only have next week until the NFL Draft is here. So if you've got any questions whatsoever, now is the time. When you are listening to this show, hit pause, head on over to our Apple Podcast page, leave us a review, leave us a question, leave us a mock draft, leave us rankings, whatever questions you've got. I promise, if you have got them in before we record next week's episode, we will answer it next week before the NFL Draft. So head on over to Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to the show. Leave us a rating, leave us a question in the comment box. We'll answer it here next week. That said, let's get things rolling here with Pick 6 and Greg Cosell.
Now it's time for Pick 6.
All right, well, excited to welcome back to the show, Greg Cosell, our friend for Pick 6. And Greg, today we're going to go through 6 different players. We're going to start at the cornerback spot. We've covered a few players in the secondary over the last couple of weeks with you. And today I want to focus on some players that you and I both kind of feel are flying under the radar a little bit as perimeter corners. And we're going to start at Alabama, which it's very rare that you have a corner from Alabama who is flying under the radar. Well, you and I both feel that's the case with Jalen Armour-Davis, a redshirt sophomore who declared for the draft this spring. Interesting how you get your thoughts on Armour-Davis and how you feel that he best projects to the NFL.
You know, I didn't know much about him. Obviously, I watch Alabama football, and obviously he's playing, but I didn't know much about him as an individual player, Fran. And I got to tell you, watching Alabama's defense, and of course, I've seen a lot of snaps of Alabama's defense, as I'm sure you have, I was kind of blown away by this kid. I mean, first of all, he's long. He's over 6 feet. He's about 200 pounds. His measurables at the combine were really, really good. He was 4.39. I really liked his tape a lot. To me, and again, you're not seeing his name in the top 3 or 4 of the corners that are being discussed as top 20 type picks. I personally believe Armour-Davis can fall into that category. He has size, he has length, he has speed, he has excellent movement. You watch the tape, they play a lot of press man at Alabama. So he has that experience. He can play mirror match press man. He can play physical press man. I think there's always some things to be cleaned up with his footwork and his balance at times. But I think he's one of the most physically gifted corners, outside corners in this draft class.
Yeah, I think the big thing that you have to bring into question with him is the limited sample size, right? And I talked about this with Derek Stingley Jr. from LSU, and he had that great first year in 2019 and then didn't play as much in 2020 and then in 2021. With Armour-Davis, it has been the exact opposite. He had 3 total tackles in the previous 3 seasons that he was at Alabama before this year. And then he comes in, he's able to hold down a starting job. He had a couple of soft tissue injuries, if memory serves, just kind of going back. He had a knee injury in 2018. Dane Brugler and the Beast had put out some of the other stuff that he's dealt with over the course of his career. And I think when you look at it, this was the first year where he was healthy. He was able to stay in the lineup. And he came through, and he was a good player, second-team All-SEC player. And I agree with all the things you said about him. I think the tape is really, really intriguing. Did you feel that there was a specific scheme or situation that would lend to him being more productive in the NFL?
Well, I think he's got the traits to play anything, but he did play a lot of press. So I thought of him that way. Now, obviously, no team plays press every snap, but I think he can play press extremely well. He's got the length to do so. I thought he was He was patient playing press. I think that there's some twitch to his movement for his size. I think he has enough top end speed. He showed the accelerating speed to run with crossers, the top end speed to run with verticals. He carried speed through the routes. I did not think he had a negative, in my opinion, that could not be cleaned up. And he was physically competitive. He played aggressively as a tackler on the perimeter. Yep. To me, he had pretty much everything you look for in a perimeter corner to transition to the NFL. Now, again, you're correct. He only has 1 year of full-time starting experience, a number of injuries throughout his Alabama career. He was a 4-star recruit out of Mobile. So, he was obviously a big-time recruit. I think that as this guy develops, as long as he can stay healthy, we could be talking about him in 2, 3 years, 4 years as being one of the better corners in the league.
Yeah, I think that when you look at him, there are some similarities to like a Carlton Davis when Davis was at Auburn, and they're just in terms of like the big body guy who runs pretty well. He's got that ability to mirror match. To me, like a lot to be excited about with that kid. Again, a good run defender. I thought the route awareness and man and zone showed up, and I'd like to see him get a little bit better at the catch point in terms of just the ball skills down the field. But again, just with 1 year starting, you would expect that there would be some discomfort there just because of the lack of playing time. Let's get to another player, this time in the Big Ten. And we've talked about this player a decent amount here on the podcast over the last couple of years, and that's 5th-year senior Tariq Castro-Fields from Penn State, just under 6'1", 197 pounds, so very similar size here to Armour Davis. What are your thoughts on Castro-Fields, and how do you like him best project into the NFL?
Another guy, Fran, that I don't understand why he's not being talked about more. Now, again, I'm not suggesting he's a top 10 pick, but another guy with size, length, good speed to play on the outside. Again, I don't know what people expected him to run. He ran exceptionally well. So he has excellent physical and athletic traits to play on the outside. He played a little more off coverage than Armour Davis in Penn State's schemes. I thought he was pretty smooth playing off coverage. I thought his transitions and his change of directions were pretty smooth. His hips are pretty loose for a tall corner. And I think that we saw him play mirror match, and I thought he did that very well when he was in press. And he does have the stride length and the speed to carry verticality. Another guy whose tape I really liked, and I think I probably like Armour Davis better overall, but I think Castro-Fields played more snaps of off coverage, so you saw that more.
Yep, he played a lot more football. He had 30 starts under his belt.
Oh, I know.
2,300 snaps played. He's played some inside. He's played some outside. He played some dime linebacker over the course of his career. Let me ask you this question, because I feel like if you want to like throw the umbrella terms with these guys, I feel like instincts are a strength for Tariq Castro-Fields. When I say instincts for you for a corner, what does that mean to you? What are some of the things that you feel show up on tape when you say a guy's an instinctive player?
Well, I think with a corner, instincts tend to show up more in zone because zone requires an understanding of routes to your side of the field, especially if there's more than one receiver. You have to understand splits. You have to understand the routes that can come from different splits. You have to be able to play both routes when you're in zone. You always hear the term play 2-to-1 if you're an outside corner with your eyes on number 2, the inside slot receiver. You always hear the term eye discipline. And guys who aren't good at it, you hear the term eye violations. So I think Castro-Fields has a very good feel for eye discipline. I think he saw things well in off coverage. So to me, he's another guy that has quality traits to play both press and off coverage, and he has the physical and athletic traits to be a good player. So again, as you and I know, 30 to 35 corners are going to be drafted next week. And it's hard to know where guys get drafted, but when you're talking about a corner that's almost 6'1", that ran a 4.38 40, that has the kind of experience he has in a quality Power 5 conference, I just can't imagine Castro-Fields dropping to the third day. I mean, maybe he will. I don't see that based on my study of his tape.
Yeah, I feel like but this corner class gets slept on a little bit from that standpoint. There was a lot talked about with the group last year. You had 2 guys go in the top 10. There was a lot of buzz about those corners. And certainly this year, there are corners that are going to go in the top half of the first round that people are excited about. But I think the depth in this class is really important. And I'm glad we were able to hit on a couple of those guys, because I really feel like Armour Davis, Tariq Castro-Fields, you get to those middle rounds. And like I said, like you said, the end of day 2, not out of the question for both of those guys. And real quick, to wrap up, Castro-Fields, Greg, the one knock people had on him going into the Senior Bowl, he had not recorded an interception since 2019. He only had 3 in 30 starts. So it's been a couple years since he's gotten a pick in a game. First day of practice down in Mobile, he made probably the play of the week. It was an outstanding leaping interception, one-on-one down the field, just a remarkable play. It's like, oh yeah, like this guy can play the ball a little bit down the field as well. So,
and that's a factor. There's no question. That's one reason why Derek Stingley is being thought of so highly. Many reasons, but his ball production, you know, so that is a factor for a corner, no question. That's a hard thing to teach too.
Yeah, no doubt. It's funny. Like you talk with I remember a conversation I had on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. This is like 5, 6, 7 years now. Troy Vincent, and we were talking about ball skills. Can you teach ball skills to corners? And he said, we had to teach Al Harris how to play the ball in the air. Like it took a long time, and we got him there, and he was able to play the ball. But when he first got to Philly, that was not a strength of his game. So it can take time. Maybe you can get him there, but certainly the time and patience would be required. Let's go to the safety spot because there are a couple safeties in this class that we have not yet to discuss, you and I together here on this show. And we'll start with a Penn State teammate there of Tariq Castro-Fields. That's Jaquan Brisker. He's got a cornerback background, was a corner through high school and the early parts of junior college as well. That comes through on tape, I feel. I'm interested to get your thoughts here on Jaquan Brisker from Penn State.
Yeah, I like Brisker a lot. It's funny, you pick guys this week, and you never know this when you ask me, hey, what guys we're going to do. But I think his tape showed a multidimensional and scheme versatile safety. I think that when you watch Brisker, he's not one of those guys that jumps off the tape. Like, in other words, you don't, it's not like a Lewis Seen who makes those kinds of plays, right, running downhill or running laterally and then laying the wood. Brisker's not that guy. Brisker, though, was asked to do a lot of things at Penn State and did them all exceptionally well. As I watched Brisker, and I watched a lot of games of Penn State's D because they had a lot of guys.
A lot of players, yep.
I continually thought of the Buffalo Bills safeties, Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. Both high-level versatility to play on the back end and in the box, both in the run game and in pass coverage. Brisker was asked to do a lot of things in the Penn State defense. He played post safety at times in cover 1 and cover 3. He played split safety in 2 shell coverages. He played in the box. He matched up to tight ends. He lined up over the slot at times, matching up to wide receivers. He was as versatile a safety as I saw. I mean, I know I haven't seen every single safety, so I don't want to, say that. Just of the ones I've seen, he was as versatile as there was. And I think that positions him really well for the league. He's the kind of guy, to me, it would not surprise me if he's a day 1 starter wherever he goes, and just you feel really comfortable with Jaquan Brisker.
It's funny. I had not thought about a Jordan Poyer comparison for Jaquan Brisker, but I think it definitely fits. Poyer came into the league from Oregon State in 2013 as a corner and made that transition. With the Eagles. He was a late round pick and ended up becoming a safety later in his career. Obviously has caught on with the Bills and has been a dynamite starter for them for a long time. And I think when you look at Brisker, it's like you said, I mean, it gets into the element of the more you can do. And when you start checking boxes with Brisker, all right, well, this guy's a pretty sure tackler. He's a good run defender. Yep. He's playing not just top down, but down close to the box, close to the line of scrimmage. And he's a really good run defender. He's got a corner background, so those man-to-man chops show up. He's got the size to be able to deal with tight ends. He's got the movement to be able to deal with running backs and even with receivers at times. He goes to the combine at 6'1", 200 and runs 4.4. So at the end of the day, it's like, all right, well, what's the problem here with Jaquan Brisker? He's a good player. The only,
and it's not a problem, is that you wouldn't call him an explosive, sudden mover. Yep. That's the only thing. But he's a very composed. He's a very composed mover, and he's a very clean mover, and he plays really well with his eyes. So when he moves, he's always moving with a purpose. I just think he's a really, really good prospect.
So it's funny that you've made that comparison to the Buffalo safeties, because the two safeties I want to talk about with you here today were Jaquan Brisker and Jalen Petrie from down in Baylor, who's 5'11", under 200 pounds. He actually kind of reminds me. I wrote down Micah Hyde while watching him. So sticking with that Buffalo Bills theme. Talk about Petrie, and then we'll talk about the safety position as a whole. But what did you see from Petrie on film at Baylor?
Petrie's a really good player, and he played, the star position, which if you're an NFL fan, you might think of Jalen Ramsey with the Rams. But the star position, you're essentially playing three things. You're an outside linebacker, you're a box safety, and you're a slot corner. That's essentially, if you reduce it to simplest terms, what the star position is. Now, there are also snaps in which Petrie, in cover 2, played one of the back end safeties, but those were few and far between. So you have to think, okay, how does he transition to the NFL? When he played outside linebacker, he rushed the quarterback a lot, and he was matched up very often against offensive tackles. That's not going to happen in the NFL. I think I keep coming back to the fact that I really like the way he plays. He's not sudden. I think of someone like Budda Baker, who for the Arizona Cardinals is asked to do a lot of things, but he's a much more explosive athlete than Jalen Petrie. I think Petrie ultimately, to me, would start his career more than likely as a nickel safety, where you could scheme blitzes because he is a very good blitzer.
Yep.
I think if you play a lot of zone, he could play over the slot. You did not see him play a lot of man-to-man versus the slot. He played a lot of zone. Now, maybe he can do it. Obviously, you and I are not going to pro days. You and I are not watching individual workouts. Maybe that is something he can do. I don't know. He did not do that on tape. So I think to myself, is he going to match up to the quality slot receivers in the NFL man-to-man? Based on tape, that's a major projection. So that's why I think he begins his career more than likely as a sub-package safety, and over time he probably becomes a starting safety, much in the way you mentioned Micah Hyde.
When you look at both these guys, obviously they can do different things for a defense, and there's some overlap there. But when you're watching guys where you start to see all right, well, they can do a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah.
And in these defenses in today's NFL, how important is that, and how important is that for your evaluation when you're watching them?
Well, I mean, it's always important to be able to do a number of things. The big question you have to decide when you watch college players, and you know this because you think the same way I do, is not just what are they doing in college. Look, Petrie's a really good college player, really good. I mean, he shows up all the time when you watch tape, and he's certainly got a great playing personality. But then you have to think about what can he do in the NFL. That's why I mentioned that he's not going to be rushing the quarterback against offensive tackles. That's not going to happen in the NFL. So you see that numerous times on tape with Baylor, and I think he even beat one once or twice, but that's not going to happen in the NFL. So you can't just say, well, he's a really good player. You have to think about his deployment in the NFL. And because I think to use that all-inclusive term again, because I think he has instincts and a feel, I think he'll be a good player, but it's going to have to be a little bit different than he was at Baylor.
Yeah, I feel like his instincts really show up playing in traffic and defeating blocks. He is outstanding at just navigating in tight spaces and finding his way to the football. He was consistently around the ball. When we did our DB preview a couple weeks back, I talked about the production and how that kind of showed up from him. But it's interesting, when you talk about where he lined up versus where Daxton Hill at Michigan lined up and their usage, they both spent a lot of time in the slot. They both spent a lot of time over number 3 or over number 2.
Right.
But Daxton Hill did it playing a lot of man-to-man coverage against wide receivers.
Well, Daxton Hill can play man in the slot.
Yep, then that's not necessarily what Petrie does. So if you're a fan and you see that your team drafts one over the other, you have to have an understanding of why they went that direction instead of the other.
Yeah, and you could easily make the argument, and I know Petrie was a great college player, that Daxton Hill is a better pro prospect because he can play safety, which he did at Michigan in their base. He can play over the slot and play man-to-man. And he's just a more explosive mover. Daxton Hill is an explosive athlete. Petrie's a really good player, but I don't think you'd call him an explosive athlete.
Right. Let's get over to the offensive side of the football, because there are 2 receivers that you and I have not hit on yet for this podcast, and they are both in the undersized side of things here, Greg. You've got 2 receivers that are both under 5'8", two receivers that are both under 180 pounds. You got Calvin Austin from Memphis, Wan'Dale Robinson from Kentucky. Just their usage, their playmaking potential. I'm interested to kind of get into both. Let's start with Calvin Austin. What did you see when you first popped the tape on with Austin?
Well, the thing about Austin, that the first thing you notice, of course, is he's small. I mean, that because he is. But Calvin Austin, what struck me is that he predominantly played outside. Now, of course, it is college football, but he predominantly played outside at 5'8" and 170 pounds. Now, this kid can run. Okay, we know that. He was a track athlete. He was a 4x100 meter guy. He was a 4x400 meter guy. He ran the 200 meters. So he can run. I almost feel like he could be an exception. I think, look, most people would look at 5'8", 170 and say, he doesn't have a significant role in the NFL, number one. And number two, if he did, then he's a slot guy. I think he could break that paradigm. I mean, his sudden explosiveness and pure speed. And by the way, his ability to get off press coverage in college was really, really good. And that's something that obviously he would have to do in the NFL because he's small and most people would think, let's press him. But the other issue when you press guys like Austin is if you miss, he's going to run by you. And he's fast and he's play speed fast. And I thought, I don't know what you thought, Fran, but I thought for a guy that, was a track guy, that you saw some nuance at times to his route running. I didn't think he was just a fast guy who ran vertically. I thought there was some subtlety and nuance to his route running.
To me, like he's a guy where not only does he have that big time speed, but he knows how to use that speed especially in trying to create some separation. He holds his stem vertical. He knows how to snap off breaks. I thought he showed consistent ability to separate, not just on tape at Memphis, but going down to the Senior Bowl. I mean, he was one of the best 4 or 5 players down there, easy over the course of the week of practice, just consistently showed that ability to get in and out of breaks, not just with the speed and quickness, but also with the technique and nuance and that ability to create that separation. And that's what I want to kind of ask you is like, when you watch these guys like Austin and you watch Wan'Dale Robinson, and their usage was a little bit different in their respective offenses, but we've had these conversations in the past. I mean, you and I talked about Tutu Atwell so much last year. He ends up being a second-round pick by the LA Rams and barely plays as a rookie. What is it that gives you confidence in a guy when you watch a guy that's this small, but has these explosive traits? And you're like, all right, I feel good about this player. Whereas for this guy, I'm just not quite sure.
Well, first of all, he's a much thicker athlete than Atwell was. But I think you have to look at press coverage because guys will be pressed when they're smaller. And no matter how strong they might be, if he's 170 pounds and he really gets jammed hard, is that going to totally disrupt his route? And I thought he did a good job versus press in the few times you did see that. And then the other thing, we know he can run. So it's really what you spoke about. Does he have some kind of savvy to his route running? You mentioned how his vertical stem. I thought he did a really good job with that as well. So those are two things I would look for. And the other thing is you want to see him catch the ball on the move. You want to see him track the deep ball because he's an instant accelerator and there are going to be deep throws. So you want to see how he tracks the ball on vertical routes because, as a rookie, let's say whoever drafts him, he's not going to play 70 snaps a game. He's not going to get 12 targets a game. He's going to probably be used early on in more specific ways. And when he gets those opportunities, you want to see him take advantage of those.
All right, well, let's get to Wan'Dale Robinson from Kentucky, who originally started his career at Nebraska, played 2 years with the Cornhuskers, then made the transition to Kentucky, his home state. He was a 4-star recruit, was the #1 player in the state coming out of high school, Gatorade Player of the Year, the whole deal coming out of Frankfort, Kentucky. But at 5'8", 178 pounds, he's got a really tiny wingspan as well, really the shortest wingspan of any receiver drafted in the last 10 years. So how do you compare and contrast Austin to Robinson, and how do you view Robinson's transition to the league?
Robinson's totally different. I mean, Robinson is not a speed player. I mean, he's not slow, but he's not a speed player. I would say he doesn't have home run speed. I think he's much more of a sudden, agile, dynamic mover. He can win and he can create explosive plays in multiple ways, but he's not necessarily just going to run by people. Can he? He can, but that's not his game. And he, to me, the way he was used at Kentucky, he was a pure slot. I mean, he had 104 catches in 2021. 84 of them came out of the slot. So I think you're dealing with a guy that is a slot receiver. That's the way teams will see him. And he was used a ton on screens, those kinds of things, jet sweeps, tunnel, bubble screens. They wanted to get him the ball where he had space because he's very, very good run after catch. That's much more of his game, whereas Austin's game is totally different.
How would you compare him to, say, like an Elijah Moore and his usage with the Jets this past year as a rookie coming out of Ole Miss, and then even what you saw or what you remember seeing from Moore from last year at this time?
I thought Moore was a stronger player.
Yeah, played through contact better. Yep.
Yeah, And for instance, I thought Moore, despite the fact that he was short, could make catches in the middle of the field, particularly on glance routes, slant routes. He could catch through contact. There was much more natural physicality to Moore's game. I would say that Robinson is not going to be a contested catch receiver. I mean, he'll go up and try to get the ball. It's not as if he doesn't try to do that. He did attack the ball in the air, but that won't be his game. So I think he's more of a space receiver, Robinson, than someone like Elijah Moore, who, despite being 5'8" or 5'9", as I recall, he actually had a physical element to his game.
Yeah, and like I said, there's going to be a role for a guy like Robinson, just like there has been for Elijah Moore moving forward into the NFL. Greg, this has been fun. 6 players up, 6 players down. Appreciate you joining us once again here for Pick 6 on the Journey to the Draft podcast, presented by LifeBrand.
Thanks, Fran.
Eagles fans, Merrill Reese here to tell you about the Eagles Autism Challenge, presented by Lincoln Financial Group. This annual ride, run, walk event supports autism research and programming as we work hard every day to advance the conversation from awareness to action. This year's event will take place on Saturday, May 21st at Lincoln Financial Field. With your support, we can help transform the lives of individuals affected by autism. Register today at eaglesautismchallenge.org.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, time now to get into Draft Buzz with my friend Ben Fennell. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're doing a little bit of some over-unders here. I enjoy doing the over-unders with Ross Tucker every week during the Journey to the Draft podcast, during the fall, during the college football season. So I thought I'd bring them here as we're a week out from the NFL draft. We are under 7 days until draft night. So, Ben, what do you think? We're just about there. We're on the doorstep.
And everyone loves a good over-under line. Everyone loves a good prop bet, especially around the draft here. So let's dive in and see where we can maybe predict where some of these overs and unders are going to hit.
I take pride in my ability to create over-unders in any situation for any scenario. So I hope that you enjoyed this exercise.
So you're the bookmaker. You're making the line. You're not picking the over-unders. Gotcha.
No, exactly. So we're going to start here with the quarterback. We're going to go position by position. I put one for each position. We'll go from there. Over-under 0.5 quarterbacks in the top 10. So essentially, Ben, do you believe that there will be a quarterback selected in the top 10 of the 2022 NFL draft? And I will say, who is it and where are they going?
Well, this one's easy to start off with because I'm going to say under 0.5 quarterbacks. So no quarterbacks in the top 10 will be selected after a massive run on quarterbacks the last few years in the top 10. So typically these positional depths ebb and flow. This is going to be the one that rubber bands back without any top 10 quarterbacks.
All right, so then let me ask you this as a follow-up. Do you feel that the Panthers stay put and draft offensive tackle or insert position here? Or do you think they trade out and end up drafting a quarterback later in the first round?
I could definitely see a trade out potential. And they need to obviously upgrade their roster in a number of different directions, particularly that offensive line. Yep. I think they'd be more than comfortable at sitting at 6 and picking O linemen, but also putting a for sale sign in the front yard saying, hey, if you want that stud edge rusher, you need to leap the Giants or leap the Falcons. Come to us at 6, do business with us. We'll get another first rounder, maybe a day 2 pick as well, and really help improve that roster, which needs help in a lot of areas.
Obviously, a couple other teams in that top 10, potentially looking for quarterback as well. Detroit, Atlanta, but Carolina, the one that seems to be the most popular destination for quarterback in mock draft.
And just to reiterate quickly, Fran, what makes the quarterback landing spot so tricky is the teams that proverbially need the long-term answer at quarterback all have starters that can survive.
Yep.
Whether it's Goff in Detroit or, Darnold in Carolina, Mariota's now in Atlanta, you have Drew Lock in Seattle. They may all look to upgrade those spots down the road, but they're more than comfortable with saying these are guys with starting experience in the NFL. We have needs elsewhere. We can roll in 2022 with our incumbent starter. I think that's what makes it so tricky to figure out who's turning the page of the future and who's okay with who they have.
Well, thank you for bringing up Seattle. I forgot to mention them. Yeah, they would be another team in that top 10 that could be in that market. Let's get to running back now. This one's another cut and dry one. 0.5 running backs in round 1 overall. Really the only running back you're seeing in mock drafts at this point is Breece Hall. Ben, do you feel like he goes in the first round?
I don't. I think he's going to slide out and be one of the first selections on day 2, right in that Javonte Williams ballpark where he was able to go to the Denver Broncos, I believe, with a mid-30s pick in the second round, if I'm not mistaken, last year. So I think he'll slide at day 2. And unfortunately, no first-round running backs once again.
All right, so no quarterbacks in the top 10, no running backs in the first round. Let's now get to the top half of round 1. And really, these are the 14 selections. So for Eagles fans listening, the way I'm going to frame this, over under 1.5 wide receivers in the top 14. So before the Eagles pick, how many receivers go off the board? There are a handful of names in this discussion. You can go to Jameson Williams and Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Drake London, a bunch of those guys in that discussion, Traylon Burks as well. Who do you feel like will go off the board, and how early does that run start, Ben? Over under 1.5 receivers in the top 14.
I'm actually going to go with the under. With the only receiver going off the board, the guy coming off the ACL injury, Jameson Williams, which seems like he would be wide receiver 1 on everybody's board without the injury, may even be receiver 1 with the injury. I think the Atlanta Falcons are really on a 2 to 3 year plan. I think at number 8 would be a great projection pick to see Jameson Williams going into that offense. Maybe you shelf him for a year, maybe he gets on the field late in his rookie campaign and really look down the road, whether it's Mariota or maybe reuniting with a CJ Stroud or the Alabama quarterback, Bryce Young, in 2 to 3 years. So Jameson Williams, the only receiver I have at the moment in the top 14.
All right, so that means that we'll say the Jets, they decide they're not going to go receiver. Washington football team, the Commanders, they decide they are not going to go wide receiver. The Houston Texans don't go wide receiver. So everybody's still on the board there for the Eagles outside of, in your case, Jameson Williams. All right, so 3 up, 3 unders. Maybe I did a bad job with the over unders here in this one, but we've got one more light one, and that's 0.5. So once again, how many tight ends in the top 45? Does one get drafted there? 0.5 tight ends in the top 45 of this draft. Do you think that happens, Ben?
I do. I think UCLA, Greg Dulcich is actually going to be the first off the board in the early second round, maybe a smidge or 2 after Breece Hall. Okay. I think we'll go in that mid-30 ballpark. Dallas Goedert, round 2, pick 49. I could see a similar type of landing spot for Greg Dulcich there. I know you gave the line at the top 45, so we'll squeeze him in there. I think he goes somewhere 40 to 45 in there right before that Dallas Goedert country.
I like it. All right, well, let's get to the next position here. Offensive line. This is where it gets interesting as well. We know that there are 3 tackles that are being talked about in the top 10, potentially 4 if you include Trevor Penning. So when you have these tackles all being talked about in the top, over under 2.5 tackles in the top 5. So I feel like we've talked about Evan Neal, we've talked about Ike Ekwonu, potentially Charles Cross. Do all 3 of those guys go in the top 5 picks? So by the time the Giants are done selecting, or do you feel like 2 are go and then only 1 falls into the back half of the top 10?
I like Ike and Evan Neal to go in the top 5, and that's it. I could definitely see the Carolina Panthers sitting there at 6, taking Charles Cross, maybe even a Trevor Penning or somebody else they like on their board. But top 5, I think some of those edge rushers and defensive players are just going to be too much to pass up. Hutchinson, Trayvon Walker, Thibodeau, maybe Jermaine Johnson is in the top 5. Some sort of combination between 3 D linemen, 2 tackles. That's your top 5.
All right. Well, we know that this draft is chock full of linemen on both sides of the football. We just talked about the offensive tackles. Let's go to the defensive line. Over under 4.5 D linemen in the top 14. So before the Eagles pick. So you're talking through all the big names: Aiden Hutchinson, Trayvon Walker, Jermaine Johnson, George Karlaftis. You could throw in Devontae Wyatt and Jordan Davis into that group, right? So all of these linemen, 4.5 in the top 14. You going high or low? What do you like, over under?
I'm going to hit the over, and I think I'm going to hit it hard because I definitely see Hutchinson, Walker, Thibodeau, Jermaine Johnson going off the board. That's 4 right there. Maybe Karlaftis to Baltimore, Devontae Wyatt, Jordan Davis, both sitting there. Georgia guys, Texans, Vikings, Baltimore. A lot of teams I think can use some D-line help there. So I think they're going to hit that 4.5 over pretty easily.
Okay. All right. Let's go to linebacker now. And this one will be really interesting because Devin Lloyd has been talked about as a potential top 10 pick, a top 15 pick for sure. But in a lot of mock drafts, you're not always seeing a linebacker go. And so what I'll say is over under 0.5 linebackers in the top 30. Do you feel like Devin Lloyd, Nakobe Dean, maybe even Quay Walker, do they definitely hear their name called in the top 30?
I would hit the over there. I don't think they're going to be top half of first round guys as we're running out of spots here with all these tackles, edge rushers, corners, the occasional receiver there. So I like Lloyd falling to the back end of round 1. Maybe Tennessee at 26 would be a nice landing spot. And Nakobe Dean, I think, can squeeze in there as well. Look out for the Cincinnati Bengals and maybe go linebacker. Detroit Lions at 32 can certainly use a captain of the defense, a linebacker mainstay in the center of that defense. So I think Devin Lloyd, Nakobe Dean put me in for the over. 2 linebackers going in the top 30.
All right, well, let's go to the cornerback spot. And really 2 corners being talked about in the top half of round 1. You've got Ahmad Gardner, Sauce Gardner from Cincinnati, and Derek Stingley Jr. from LSU. Both guys capable of going in the top 10. There's a chance that both go, but I'm going to set the over-under at 1.5 corners in the top 10 of this draft. Do you feel like Sauce Gardner or Derek Stingley will fall out, or do both guys go in the top 10 when it's all said and done?
I think both guys firmly go in the top 10, and I would not be surprised to see them fill out the top 10 in back-to-back picks.
Ooh, nice.
Ahmad Gardner, 9th to the Seattle Seahawks. I get to see being a great scheme fit out there. They clearly have need at cornerback, all intents and purposes on both sides. And then the New York Jets at number 10, also in the market for all intents and purposes, maybe 2 starting corners in this draft. So I think Derek Stingley to the Jets at 10, Ahmad Gardner, 9th overall to the Seattle Seahawks is very, very possible.
All right, let's go to safety now. Over under 0.5 safeties in the top 10. This is essentially, do you feel like Kyle Hamilton's going to go in the top 10? And if not, where do you think he goes?
I don't. I'm running out of spots here in my top 10. I think the edge rusher's getting picked up. The run on corners there I just mentioned, 9th and 10th overall. That Washington Commanders there at 11 is a very interesting spot in the draft, depending on what side of the ball they want to go with. I really think they go with a Kyle Hamilton there. They can use a leader, playmaker on the back end of that defense to pair with some of their mainstays. I think Kyle Hamilton just a smidge outside the top 10.
Yeah, that was a tough one to do. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go like overall safeties in round 1, but I thought just the discussion of Hamilton probably a little bit more pertinent, especially for the majority of our listeners being Eagles fans, that would be a big
overall safeties in round 1. I think it'll be about 3 or so. I like Lewis Seen to squeeze into the back end of round 1 there. And don't be surprised to see Dax Hill go into the 20s there. A lot of teams can use that nickel safety hybrid help, towards the late end of round 1.
All right, well, let's get to our mock draft roundup because we next week will be covering our full 32-team expert mock draft. I'm talking with beat writers, national reporters. I'm about halfway done as we sit here today on Wednesday afternoon. So I'm interested to get this whole thing done. You and I are recording that next week where you have no idea what these picks are going to be. So I'm going to get your live reactions to experts from all across the country making these selections for their local teams. But we'll do that next week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, which means this is the last version of our mock draft roundup where it is just one person's mock draft that you and I are going to look at. It's crazy because we have been doing this on a weekly basis since like August. So fun that we're finally here. Let's go to Pete Schrager, NFL insider from NFL.com. You can see him every single day on Good Morning Football. He put out his second mock draft in the last month. And in this draft, he's got the Eagles with 2 selections in round 1. 15th overall, we'll start with wide receiver Drake London. Here's the blurb from Pete. He said, could Philly draft a wide receiver in the first round for the 3rd straight year? Yes, they can. Remember, they have 10 total selections, and Nick Sirianni is an offensive coach with a big say in this pick. So, Ben, we did our wide receiver preview earlier this week, which, by the way, if you have not, make sure you go listen to that. Me, Dane, and Ben going through the entire wide receiver class. Dane covered the round 1 guy. So you didn't get to chime in on Drake London. And for our new listeners, because we've been gaining listeners each and every week here on the show, Give us your take on Drake London. How do you feel that he best transitions to the NFL? What is the best case scenario for Drake London?
Well, obviously a tall, long, above the rim catch radius type of receiver that I think is going to have a lot more positional versatility than people are talking about. This is not a guy I think is just going to survive outside the numbers. He's going to be a big slot presence. He's going to do some move tight end things as he did early in his career at USC. Very strong run after catch guy, can wall off players in the run game, which I think Nick Sirianni is really going to like, moving around a 6'5", 215-pound offensive weapon to just use in so many different ways. We know he has the strong hands. We know he's going to be dominant in the red zone, but I think you can do a lot more things with Drake London than maybe his perceived size and profile would suggest. I think he's going to be a really interesting and versatile weapon for this offense.
Certainly a guy that has been highly debated throughout the course of the process, going back to last summer, because before that, he was only a slot guy. So last year was his first time on the perimeter, and he came through, was extremely productive in his first season on the outside as the go-to weapon for the Trojans, quarterback Keaton Slovas. And it was an up and down season for them, mostly down, but London was certainly a bright spot, and now is hoping to take that skill set to the NFL. Let's now get to the second pick here, 18th overall. Linebacker Devin Lloyd. Here's the blurb here from Pete Schrager. Lloyd's a great player in person, and he's got the X's and O's know-how to be the shot caller of the Eagles defense. He has exceptional pass coverage skills. Check out his interception against Stanford, and he can line up with tight ends in the passing game. So, Ben, you were a big fan of Devin Lloyd's game. You always have been. In your mind, who does he compare to? Who's a strong pro comparison for Devin Lloyd, and how do you project him to the league?
Yeah, Devin Lloyd is an outstanding prospect. You want to watch his interception against Stanford? I'll do you one better. Watch his interception against Oregon, or maybe his interception against Washington State, or maybe his interception against USC. He had a lot of plays in the pass game over his career. Very interesting profile in that he's played a little bit of off-ball Mike Will, but has played a lot of Sam kind of off the line of scrimmage, which makes him in a prime position to make a lot of plays, whether it's playing the passing lane as he did in that Washington State and Stanford game, just plucking the ball out of the air, whether it's blitzing, chasing the quarterback out of the pocket late as a kind of a green dog rusher as well, or just dropping into underneath zones, rangy tackler, height, weight, speed, the way his arms hang, the way his jersey sits on him. He looks a lot like a Fred Warner. And I know that's whoa, easy with that comparison. That's really the way Fred Warner played at BYU. Sam position, down on the line of scrimmage, stacking and shedding tight ends in the run game all the time, blitzing, good ball skills. Next thing you know, he's a Mike linebacker at the next level, captain, leader, very cerebral, good instincts. Devin Lloyd's not coming off the field. I think would be a great nucleus of any defense, particularly here in Philadelphia and Jonathan Gannon, that likes to kind of move their linebackers around and play with different fronts. So if you have different fronts, odd fronts, bear fronts, things like that, you better have some linebackers behind that can play different schemes, stack backer, single gap, things like that. So I think Devin Lloyd would be a really nice piece for any defense, particularly here in green.
All right, so we got the rest of the draft to kind of go through here, and it's a really interesting mock draft. Again, I love getting all the different takes from people all around the NFL. This is the second week in a row now that we've covered a mock draft here on this podcast, Ben, from NFL.com, that has Trayvon Walker, the pass rusher from Georgia, going number 1, and Aiden Hutchinson from Michigan going number 2. What do you make of it? We're a little bit of a groundswell of support here for Walker potentially going number 1 to the Jags.
I like Trayvon Walker as a player. I like Aiden Hutchinson. They're both kind of brute strong, point of attack players, not looking to run around to anybody, very hard-nosed players, violent hands. They're just not the sexiest players. They're not the bendy, flexible types. And the big concern with Trayvon Walker is the production. And there's some reasons for that within the scheme, but what do I make of Trayvon Walker going 1? Fran, people like the unknown. People like the upside. People love the potential. Once you know what you're getting, it's suddenly not so exciting. So I think having a little bit of that projection and upside in Trayvon Walker's game and kind of thought of what could he be really excite people. And I hate to go to the Peter Griffin, do you want the mystery box or the boat kind of thing, but there's a little bit of that with draft prospects and always wanting to know who's next and who's going to be that next star, or who's the guy that, maybe wasn't a star on Saturdays, but will be on Sundays. People love that conversation. I think Trayvon Walker is fully wrapped in that. Very interesting prospect. He's a unicorn. Now it's just, will that translate to the next level? And it seems like the Jacksonville Jaguars are willing to bet on it.
I just feel like, watching how this has changed a little bit from a narrative standpoint, Aiden Hutchinson has kind of been locked in on this since the combine. Basically, that was when the buzz really built that, all right, it's going to be Hutchinson. It's not going to be a tackle. Free agency happened. They franchise tagged Cam Robinson. They went out, they got a couple other pieces for the O-line. It's like, all right, they're going to go Hutchinson 1 and move on from there. As this happened, it's like, all right, well, Detroit, they're not going to take Hutchinson. I think there was a lot of buzz in Indianapolis. They would love to take the hometown kid. I just feel like the door is still open for Detroit to go quarterback here. And I feel like if it is Hutchinson still on the board, I wonder how that would affect it. It's interesting. I'm very fascinated to see how this goes. And that's what makes this draft so intriguing is that, usually by this point, last year, we knew what 1 and 2 were going to be at this point. We had a good feeling, especially on this podcast, that we really felt that would be Trey Lance at number 3 overall. And then after that, it was like, all right, you're just trying to pick around. Here, there's so much intrigue about number 1, much less 2, 3, 4, 5. It's what makes this such a fun draft to be able to cover.
And Trayvon Walker reminds me a lot of different players. They just had more production in college, but they may not wow you at the next level, but they're solid players. I think you're getting like a Bradley Chubb kind of player who is a 5th overall pick. But Bradley Chubb had back-to-back double-digit sack seasons coming out of NC State. So you felt more confident about that. If I said, hey, is Trayvon Walker, can he be a Cam Jordan for somebody? I think you'd be pretty excited about that.
Yep. Right.
Now, Cam Jordan has the positional versatility. He's a 3-down player. He's smart. He's a leader. That's the type of guy you're getting. It just is very interesting in trying to reflect what he did on Saturday in the production moving forward to Sundays. And not many guys get taken without those stat lines filled up.
Well, let's get to the rest of this top 16 here, the top half of round 1. I want to ask you, most shocking pick in the top 16 of this draft? Because I would say for me, it happened really early, and that was Charles Cross at number 5, the tackle from Mississippi State, going to the New York Giants, which, by the way, Ben, there's been a decent amount of buzz, local beat writers, national writers, with Charles Cross being connected to the New York Giants. And not only that, Andrew Thomas staying at left tackle and Cross moving to right tackle. And so that's what's fascinating about that is like, you have Andrew Thomas, who he played both sides when he was at Georgia, just send him over to right tackle. No, they want Cross to play right tackle. That's the buzz. That's the word. But Cross going at 5 ahead of Evan Neal, who ends up falling to number 8 to the Atlanta Falcons. That to me was the most shocking pick in this mock.
Yeah, the most shocking for me, I think, would be Jameson Williams going 10th to the Jets.
Yep.
I'm just not really sure how the Jets feel about their 2022 season moving forward and if they're looking to contend and compete. But Zach Wilson moving into year 2 needs some immediate help, whether it's on the O-line, the receiving room, adding another running back to Michael Carter and Tevin Coleman. I just wish to have a little bit more of an immediate impact player for that very young roster of Joe Douglas up there in New York.
So last question I've got for you here with this mock draft, going to the back half of round 1, picks 17 through 32. We're now a couple weeks into baseball season. Which pick fits like a glove? Which one just a natural fit? You're like, I love this selection, this player team fit.
I'm going to go with the Tennessee Titans there in the back half of round 1, Kenyan Green, who I think was a guy we had initially watched some film and said, reminds me a little bit of Quentin Spain.
Yeah, because he got that flatty stance. Yep.
No question, kind of a people mover type, and it was a left guard there for the Tennessee Titans for a long time. And, I could see him kind of also resembling the Roger Saffolds of the world, who, was a mainstay guard there at Tennessee for a long time. So I think they need some interior line help. And I think Kenyan Green would be a really nice piece and kind of a tone-setting gap scheme type of offensive lineman.
He definitely fits the play personality of that Titans offense, right? And of the head coach. I feel like Kenyan Green definitely fits that to a T. For me, I'm actually going to stay offensive line. I'm going to go Arizona Cardinals. And we had earlier this week, we did our On the Clock segment, and I listed out all the reasons why Zion Johnson was a perfect fit for the Dallas Cowboys at 24 overall. Went through the whole list. The only wrench in that entire discussion is that Zion Johnson really fits like a glove for the Arizona Cardinals, the pick before the Dallas Cowboys. So Zion Johnson, you plug him in right at left guard, next to Rodney Hudson, in between him and DJ Humphries, perfect fit, plug and play, no concern. And I think when you go back, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, he also checks a lot of the boxes that the Cardinals have liked in high picks over the years as well. So to me, Zion Johnson, Arizona Cardinals, that one fit really well for me.
Yeah, I really like that as well. I could see a lot of these interior guys going off the board in the back half of round one. Linderbaum, Kenyan Green, Zion Johnson. There's going to be some really good immediate starters.
All right, so last question for you. One thing you love to do when you see a new mock draft come out is like, all right, who were the guys that weren't picked? Who were the guys that were left off this mock draft? Who's a couple of names here that stood out to you from that standpoint?
Well, as much as there were some decorated Georgia Bulldogs and Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt, getting selected in the first round, handful of really good players not going in the first round that I could see there being a great run on some Bulldogs on day two, whether that's Lewis Cine, the safety, who I think is a round one player all day long. Quay Walker, Nakobe Dean, George Pickens could be one of the first receivers taken on day two. So I think Georgia has a lot of good players available. Rounds 2, round 3. Not so sure a lot of these guys are going to be there, though. Mm-hmm. That kind of back end of round 1, I think, could be a nice landing spot for literally any of those players I just mentioned.
Well, we'll have plenty to talk about because we're just about there on the doorstep. Like I said at the top, T-minus 7 days until the NFL draft. Ben, next time we talk to you here on the show, it'll be draft week, and we'll be talking about the defensive line, arguably the deepest group, the most talented group in this draft. You, me, Dane, we'll be talking about it right here next week on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by LifeBrand.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
Good stuff there from Ben. Let's now get into a couple questions here from our draft mailbag. And again, the best way to hit us up, head on over to Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or Spotify, wherever you listen. Leave us a rating, leave us a question. We'll answer it here on one of these upcoming shows before the draft hits next week. So you better get in there now because it'll usually take a little bit of time before it registers there on those platforms. So we're going to start things off with Jason Moore's twin, who left a 5-star review saying, I learned so much from this podcast. Fran gets the best and smartest along with him to give you the best draft info. Eagles fan or not. Jason Moore's twin, I appreciate that. Here's the mock draft here from the twin. First off, we're going to go with Andrew Booth, and that's the pick at number 15. Then it includes a trade back from 18 to 23. Treylon Burks for the wide receiver from Arkansas is the pick. I would say these are two of the more popular selections for the Eagles in mock drafts. Andrew Booth, not as much lately just because of the injury, but I think when you look at Andrew Booth and his complete package, what he brings to the table with his size, his movement, his ball skills, his toughness, really, really intriguing player. So I am not going to have any qualms with you taking him that high there, Jason Moore's twin. And then you get Treylon Burks, and a guy that we have waxed poetic enough about here on this show over the last few months, over the last several months now. Treylon Burks, height, weight, speed player from Arkansas, extremely productive, but also just a very tough player to cover. When you talk about his skill set, the way he was used was very specific. They just try and move him around the formation, find ways to get him the football. He requires some polish, but when you talk about his upside and what he can be, really, really fun player, both with the ball and without the ball during his time at Arkansas. Let's get to the second day of the draft. 3 picks here. Lewis Cine, the safety from Georgia, Sam Williams, the pass rusher from Ole Miss, and then Darien Beavers in the third round, the linebacker from Cincinnati. We'll start with Lewis Cine, one of the more fun safeties to study in this draft. He's a sure tackler. He does an outstanding job as a depth player. So he's playing in the third level of the defense and playing top down. He's shown some range. He tested extremely well. He's a great kid with an outstanding background. Go read about Lewis Cine if you don't know his background. But I think when you talk about him, his best football could be ahead of him as well because he has not been playing it for a long stretch of time. But when you talk about a pure height, weight, speed aspect, check the box. When you're talking about from a character standpoint, check the box. He's been durable. He's been pretty productive. It hasn't been outstanding ball production, but he's been pretty productive, especially playing downhill against the run. Lewis Cine checks a lot of boxes. Then you get to Sam Williams. He's had some things that he's worked through over the course of his career, but he's an undersized pass rusher who wins with speed and quickness. He's been productive, especially this past year, his final on campus at Ole Miss. So he is one of those pure high side rushers that you're going to move around and try and create some matchups with him across the line of scrimmage. And then Darien Beavers at Cincinnati. He is a versatile player. He started his career at UConn, then made the transition to Cincinnati, and he is a very versatile player. He would probably play as more of a Sam linebacker for the Eagles, but he could play up on the line of scrimmage. He can work out over tight ends. He can rush the passer. Some people view him as a pure defensive end moving into the NFL. So Darien Beavers, a really fun player to study. Would be a fun player to project to this Eagles defense. Now, 3 picks here on day 3. Thomas Booker, the defensive lineman from Stanford. Pierre Strong, the running back from South Dakota Dakota State, and Austin Allen, the tight end from Nebraska. I think when you're looking at Thomas Booker, he's a guy that's caught a little bit of buzz here during the pre-draft process. He went to the Shrine Bowl, had a good week of practice out there. He's got some inside-outside versatility, and so that's going to give him a lot of value moving into the league where so many teams are running multiple fronts. He's strong. He's high character. He's got a little bit of pass rush juice. So Thomas Booker, an interesting name there at defensive tackle. Pierre Strong, one of the darlings of the combine. He ran sub 4.4. Coming out of South Dakota State, he was a big play threat. Has the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield and be a perimeter run threat. So Pierre Strong, a guy to keep an eye on. And then Austin Allen, just a well-rounded player as a tight end there for Nebraska. Just a guy that is going to wow you from an A-plus physical trait, but I think that he's got enough to be able to chip in. And at the end of the day, you're talking about the 7th round. I think that makes a lot of sense. So Jason Moore's twin, good stuff there on that mock draft. We got one more here. Eagles only mock draft. This comes from Matty G _28, who left a 5-star review saying, Fran, I think after about 50 mock drafts, I'll finally let this one be the last one for this draft class. This is my favorite by far. These are the guys I've been banging on the table for the most. I would love to know what you think. So we've got 2 first-round picks here. The 2 first-round picks, the very same as the last one. Andrew Booth at 15, Traylon Burks this time at 18. So I already gave you what I thought on those 2 players. You get to day 2, you've got 3 picks. A second-rounder with Chad Muma, the linebacker from Wyoming, safety Nick Cross from Maryland, and Kentucky center Luke Fortner. We'll start with Muma. This is a guy that I really like, and he just checks so many boxes at the linebacker position. He's instinctive, he's strong, he's got good ball skills and awareness and coverage. He can blitz. He can just do everything that you need. Really, I mean, look, he tested pretty well. He had a good Senior Bowl week. I don't know what's not to like about Chad Muma. That's a really good player to study over the course of his career at Wyoming. Nick Cross, he is a really intriguing player because of his combination of height, weight, speed at the safety spot. He will come down and hit you. He's got some range. He's got some position versatility. He's got to clean up some things as a tackler. He's got some inconsistencies there, but he also hasn't played a ton of football. He was a junior who declared early for the draft. He was late to it in high school. I think when you look at Nick Cross, you're betting on the come there, and that's why you're taking him in the 3rd round of the NFL draft. And then Luke Fortner, he is just a rock-solid player as the center for Kentucky. He's a big center who's got some position versatility. He's played a little bit of tackle, a little bit of guard, so you like that he's dabbled there at a number of different spots. That versatility will certainly help him during the process, but Fortner, just a rock-solid player. And you never want to say, like, can't miss, but he's one of those high-floor players, Luke Fortner, the center from Kentucky. Handful of day 3 picks here. We'll buzz through them real fast. Round 4, you got Cincinnati running back Jerome Ford, who not only had a good final season as a senior there for the Bearcats on their way to the national, to the college football playoff, but he started his career at Alabama. Was a 4-star kid. He's got some juice to him. There are a lot of people that are really big fans of Jerome Ford. Then you get to Obinna Ezzy from the tackle from TCU. He began his career at Memphis, and he's a big, strong, powerful player. He's probably got a little bit heavier feet, but that's why he's a 5th-round pick and not a 3rd-round pick. But I think when you look at Ezzy, that's what he brings to the table. He's a pure tackle, left tackle, right tackle. Derek Deese Jr., his father, an all-pro with the San Francisco 49ers. He's a tight end from San Jose State. He's a big-body tight end who you're projecting to be more of a blocker and be able to get after people from that standpoint. But he also has some fluidity to him as well to get down the seam. That would be Derek Deese Jr. from San Jose State. Noah Ellis, another guy with NFL bloodlines. Noah Ellis, his father, Luther Ellis, was a longtime defensive tackle. His brother actually on the Eagles roster. But I think when you look at Ellis, he is a super-sized nose tackle. He is big. He is thick. He went to the Shrine Bowl and caught some eyes there. I think when you look at him, you are projecting him as that pure nose tackle moving into the NFL. And then 7th round, this is going to be a very fun pick for whoever ends up with Matt Araiza from San Diego State. The punter from the Aztecs has been, I'll say this, he is arguably the best punting prospect to come out of the draft since I've been covering it. The way that he boots the football is just really, really impressive. A bunch of 80-plus yard kicks, a bunch of 70-plus yard kicks. There's some buzz that he might go off the board as early as the 3rd round. And so Matt Araiza in the 7th round, I would say that's probably unlikely. I would think that he's going to be going off the board round 3, round 4, round 5 when it's all said and done. So Matty G, good stuff there. Jason Moore's twin, good stuff. Appreciate you guys sending in those mock drafts with the 5-star reviews over on Apple Podcasts. And again, the best way to reach us, head on over Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you listen. Leave us a rating. We'll hit you up right here next week on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by LifeBrand.